The eviction notice trembled in my arthritic hands as I read the words that would shatter what was left of my world. 30 days to vacate the premises. My own daughter's signature stared back at me from the bottom of the page, as cold and final as the February wind rattling the windows of what I'd foolishly believed was still my home. I sank into Frank's old recliner, the one piece of furniture Sarah had grudgingly allowed me to keep when I moved in 3 years ago. The leather was worn smooth from his hands, and sometimes, if I closed my eyes tight enough, I could still smell his aftershave lingering in the fabric. But not today. Today, all I could smell was the bitter taste of rejection. It hadn't always been like this between Sarah and me. Lord knows it hadn't. When Frank died of that sudden heart attack, leaving me with nothing but memories and a modest social security check, Sarah had seemed genuinely concerned. "Don't worry about staying in that big house alone, Mom," she'd said, her voice soft with what I thought was love. "Come live with us." The kids would love having Grandma around more. And they did love it, at least at first. Little Tommy, barely 8 then, would race up those stairs every day after school, backpack flying behind him, calling Grandma Rose. "Grandma Rose, wait until you hear what happened in math class today." Emma, my sweet Emma, would curl up beside me on the couch while I helped her with homework, her head heavy against my shoulder as she fought sleep. I'd been their anchor while Sarah worked those brutal double shifts at the hospital, picking up every overtime hour she could get. Emergency room nursing paid well, but it demanded everything from a person. I understood that. I'd raised Sarah mostly on my own after her father ran off when she was 12. I knew about sacrifice. So I sacrificed again. I paid my $800 a month religiously, more than fair for a small upstairs bedroom and shared family space. I cooked dinner every night, those hearty meals growing boys and girls needed. I scrubbed floors, folded laundry, and made sure homework was done and teeth were brushed. I was the grandmother, but I was also the unpaid nanny, housekeeper, and cook. And I was grateful for it. Grateful to feel needed again. The first crack in our fragile peace came 6 months ago when Sarah got promoted to head nurse. More money, more prestige, more confidence. She started coming home with stories about her new colleagues, their nice cars and vacation homes. She began looking around our modest split level like she was seeing it through different eyes. "Mom," she said one evening, not looking up from her laptop as she typed, "you left the porch light on again last night. Do you know what our electric bill was this month?" I'd been washing dishes, my hands deep in warm, soapy water. "I leave it on in case you come home late from work, dear. So you can see to get your keys out safely. I can manage. We need to watch every penny if we're going to get ahead." Get ahead. That became her favorite phrase. Everything had to contribute to getting ahead. Even me. The complaints started small, like paper cuts that don't seem like much until you realize you're bleeding from a dozen tiny wounds. I used too much hot water in the shower. I watched television too loudly. I bought the wrong brand of milk, the expensive organic kind instead of the store brand. "Mom, you've got to be more mindful," Sarah would say, her voice taking on that clipped, professional tone she used with difficult patients. "We're not made of money." But I was paying my share. $800 a month. Plus I bought my own groceries and never asked for a dime. I wanted to remind her of that, but something in her eyes warned me off. They'd gone cold, calculating. Like she was adding up my worth and finding the numbers didn't balance. The children began to notice. Tommy stopped running up the stairs to find me. When I asked about his day, he'd shrug and mumble, "It was okay," before escaping to his room. Emma still let me help with homework, but she kept glancing toward the kitchen where her mother might appear at any moment, disapproval written across her face. "Your mom seems stressed," I told Emma one afternoon as we worked on her book report together. Emma's small shoulders tensed. "She says we can't afford to live here anymore. She says we need to make some changes." Changes? My heart had sunk then, though I'd tried to keep my voice light. "What kind of changes, sweetheart?" But Emma had just shrugged, the way children do when they know they're standing too close to adult problems they don't understand. The breaking point came last week during dinner. I'd made Frank's famous pot roast, the one that had won 3 blue ribbons at the county fair back when we were young and still believed the world held nothing but promise. The smell filled the whole house, rich and comforting, and for a moment, I felt useful again. "This is delicious, Grandma," Tommy said, and Emma nodded enthusiastically, gravy on her chin. But Sarah barely touched her plate. She kept checking her phone, her jaw tight with some internal tension I couldn't read. "The Hendersons put their house on the market," she said suddenly, not looking at any of us. Oh, I tried to keep my voice neutral. The Hendersons lived in one of those new developments across town, the kind with granite countertops and 3-car garages. Asking $450. Can you imagine? For a house that size. Sarah's eyes had a distant look, like she was seeing something the rest of us couldn't. With my promotion and David's raise, we could actually qualify for a mortgage like that. David, her husband, shifted uncomfortably. Sarah, we've talked about this. I know what we talked about. Her voice was sharp. But times change. Opportunities don't wait around forever. I felt Emma's small hand slip into mine under the table. At 10 years old, she already understood more than she should have to. That night, I heard them arguing through the thin walls. Not the words, but the tone. Sarah's voice rising and falling like a tide, David's quieter responses, the occasional sharp silence that meant someone had said something that couldn't be taken back. The next morning, Sarah was waiting for me in the kitchen with a cup of coffee and an expression I'd never seen on her face before. Professional. Distant. Like I was a patient she was about to deliver bad news to. Mom, we need to talk. And now here I sit, 30 days' notice in my lap, wondering how love can turn so cold so quickly. Outside, the first snow of winter is starting to fall, and I can't help but think about how Frank used to say that snow makes everything clean and new. But looking at this piece of paper, all I can think is how some things, once they freeze, never really thaw the same way again. The grandfather clock in the hallway, another piece of my old life that Sarah had allowed me to keep, chimed 4 o'clock. Soon the children would be home from school, and I'd have to find a way to smile at them like nothing had changed. Like their grandmother wasn't being thrown out into the cold by their own mother. I folded the notice carefully and slipped it into my apron pocket, right next to my heart where it seemed to burn like a coal. Tomorrow, I'd have to start making phone calls, looking for somewhere else to go. But tonight, I'd make dinner one more time, help with homework one more time, and pretend that love hadn't turned as cold as the winter wind outside. After all, I'd had plenty of practice pretending things were fine when they weren't. It's what mothers do, even when their own children forget that mothers have hearts that can break too. Wanting to see what would happen next, subscribe to this channel to get to listen to more of our upcoming exciting stories. Click on the subscribe button now. Thank you. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening, exactly 1 week after I'd tucked that eviction notice away like a dirty secret. I should have known it was coming from the way Sarah had been moving through the house all day, sharp, jerky movements like a woman wound too tight, ready to snap. I had just finished helping Tommy with his math homework at the kitchen table. Poor child was struggling with fractions, and I remembered how his mother had struggled with the same thing at his age. Think of it like pieces of pie, I'd told him, sketching little circles on his notebook paper. If you cut a pie into 4 pieces and eat one, how many pieces are left? His face had lit up with understanding. That beautiful moment when confusion melts away and knowledge takes its place. 3 pieces, Grandma Rose. That's my smart boy. I'd ruffled his sandy hair, the same color Sarah's had been at that age. Now pack up your books. Your mom will be home soon. That's when I heard her car door slam in the driveway, harder than usual. Then her footsteps on the front porch, quick and angry. The front door banged open with such force that the little ceramic angel on the hall table rattled. Tommy's eyes went wide. He knew that sound as well as I did. It was the sound of his mother's temper reaching its breaking point. Without a word, he shoved his books into his backpack and disappeared upstairs, smart enough to get out of the line of fire. I was wiping down the kitchen counter when Sarah stormed in, still wearing her blue scrubs, her hair escaping from its ponytail in wild wisps. In her hands, she clutched a stack of bills like they were weapons she was preparing to throw. "Mom, I can't do this anymore." The words exploded out of her, her face flushed red with frustration and exhaustion. She slammed the bills down on the counter so hard that the salt and pepper shakers jumped. "Either you pay $1,200 rent starting next month, or you need to find somewhere else to live. This isn't working." The words hit me like a physical blow. I gripped the edge of the counter to steady myself, my heart hammering against my ribs. This was my Sarah, my baby girl, the same child I had rocked through countless nights of colic and teething pain. The same daughter I had worked 2 jobs to support when her first husband, Marcus, had walked out on her when Tommy was just a baby. "Sarah, sweetheart," I said, trying to keep my voice calm and reasonable, "I'm already paying what we agreed on. $800 a month, plus I buy my own. That's not enough anymore." She was shouting now, her voice cracking with strain. "Pay the rent or get out." The kitchen fell silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of David's television in the living room. Even that went quiet. He'd heard the shouting and turned down the volume, probably hoping to stay invisible until the storm passed. I stared at my daughter's face, searching for some trace of the gentle girl who used to bring me dandelions picked from the yard, calling them sunshine flowers because they made me smile. But all I saw was anger and resentment, as if every kindness I'd ever done for her had been transformed into some sort of debt she resented owing. "Sarah," I whispered, my voice barely audible, "where is this coming from? Have I done something wrong?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Wrong? Mom, you've been living here like some kind of boarder who thinks she owns the place. Using our electricity, our heat, our hot water. Eating our food. I buy my own groceries," I interrupted, stung. "You know I do." "Oh, please." She rolled her eyes, and I saw a cruelty there that made my stomach clench. "A few boxes of crackers and some tea bags? That's not groceries, Mom. That's not even close." I wanted to tell her about all the times I'd slipped an extra 20 into her purse when she wasn't looking. About how I'd been quietly paying their car insurance for the past 2 years, $437 a month for both vehicles. Because I'd overheard David on the phone with the insurance company, his voice tight with stress as he tried to negotiate a payment plan they couldn't afford. I wanted to tell her about the grocery shopping I did every week, claiming I was just picking up a few things for myself, when really I was buying enough food to feed a family of 5. The good steaks I'd slip into the freezer without mentioning them. The organic milk Emma needed for her growing bones. The name-brand cereal Tommy loved, but they couldn't justify buying. I wanted to tell her about the credit card bill I'd found on the counter 3 months ago. $1,500 they owed for Christmas presents they'd charged, trying to make sure the children had the kind of holiday their friends at school would have. I'd called the company and paid it off completely, then thrown away the thank you letter they'd sent to my name. But I couldn't tell her any of that, because I'd learned long ago that sometimes love means protecting people's pride, even when they're breaking your heart. "Mom, are you even listening to me?" Sarah's voice had gone cold now, which was somehow worse than the shouting. "I'm trying to explain reality here. We can't afford to support you anymore." "Support me?" The words burned like acid in my throat. "I'm not asking you to support me, Sarah. I pay my share. $800 doesn't even cover the extra utilities." She grabbed one of the bills from the counter and waved it at me. "Look at this electric bill. It's doubled since you moved in." "Doubled? And the water bill?" "Don't even get me started on the water bill." I thought about all those loads of laundry I'd been doing, not just my own, but everyone's. How I'd been washing David's work clothes every night so he'd have clean uniforms, and doing the children's school clothes so Sarah wouldn't have to worry about it after her long shifts. I thought about the hot baths I'd drawn for Emma when she had those growing pains in her legs, and how I'd been getting up early every morning to wash dishes from the night before so Sarah wouldn't face a messy kitchen when she stumbled downstairs for coffee. "If my being here is such a hardship," I said quietly, "then maybe you're right. Maybe I should go." For just a moment, Sarah's face flickered. Something soft and uncertain crossed her features, like she was seeing me clearly for the first time in months. But then her jaw hardened again, and that cold mask slipped back into place. "Good," she said, her voice clipped and professional. "I'm glad you finally understand the situation." From the living room, I heard David's footsteps, slow and reluctant. He appeared in the kitchen doorway, his face carefully neutral, but I could see the discomfort in his eyes. David had always been a good man, steady, kind, the sort of father his children deserved. But he'd learned to pick his battles with Sarah, and apparently, I wasn't a battle worth fighting. "Sarah," he said carefully, "maybe we should all sit down and talk about this calmly." "There's nothing to talk about." Sarah didn't even look at him. Her eyes stayed fixed on me, hard and unforgiving. "Mom has 30 days to figure out her living situation. End of discussion." 30 days, I repeated, the words feeling strange on my tongue. In 30 days, Frank and I would have been married 43 years. In 30 days, it would be the anniversary of the first time Sarah had said "Mama," toddling toward me across our old kitchen floor with her arms outstretched. "That's more than generous," Sarah said, and I heard the finality in her voice. This wasn't a negotiation or a family discussion. This was a business transaction, and I was being fired. Upstairs, I could hear Tommy's bedroom door creak open, then footsteps in the hallway. The children were listening, of course. Children always know when their world is shifting beneath their feet, even when the adults try to pretend everything is fine. I'll start looking tomorrow, I said, my voice steady despite the way my hands were shaking. I'll be out as soon as I can find a place. Sarah nodded curtly, like I was a tenant who'd finally agreed to reasonable terms. Good. And Mom, maybe this will be good for all of us. You'll have your independence back, and we'll have our family space back. Independence. Family space. The words felt like euphemisms designed to make cruelty sound reasonable. But I nodded anyway, because what else was there to do? As Sarah brushed past me to head upstairs, probably to check on the children who'd been listening to every word, I caught a whiff of her perfume. The same lavender scent I'd bought her for her 16th birthday, back when I was still the most important woman in her world. David lingered in the doorway for a moment, his face creased with something that might have been guilt or regret. Rose, It's all right, David, I said, though nothing was all right and we both knew it. She's doing what she thinks is best for her family. He opened his mouth like he wanted to say more, then closed it again. With a small, helpless shrug, he followed his wife upstairs, leaving me alone in the kitchen that still smelled like the pot roast I'd made for dinner. Pot roast no one had complimented, pot roast that had been eaten in silence while Sarah stared at her phone and the children picked at their plates. I stood there for a long time, listening to the house settle around me. From upstairs came the muffled sounds of bedtime routines. Water running, doors closing, Sarah's voice sharp as she told Tommy to brush his teeth properly. Normal sounds, family sounds, life going on as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. In the space of 10 minutes, I'd gone from being a grandmother living with her family to being an unwanted boarder, counting down her final days. I walked to the kitchen window and looked out at the backyard where I'd watched Tommy learn to ride his bike just last summer, where Emma had built fairy houses out of twigs and leaves while I hung laundry on the line. The yard was brown now, winter dead, waiting for spring to bring it back to life. Unlike some things, I thought, grass always gets a second chance. In my apron pocket, Frank's old handkerchief, the one I'd been carrying since his funeral, felt warm against my fingers. If he were here, what would he tell me to do? Frank had always been the practical one, the problem solver. He'd probably tell me to stop feeling sorry for myself and start making phone calls. But first, I had to figure out how to tell two innocent children that their grandmother was leaving, and how to do it without letting them see that their mother had just broken my heart into pieces so small I wasn't sure I'd ever be able to put them back together again. After that horrible night, I went to my room and cried until I had no tears left. I sat on the edge of my narrow bed, the same bed I'd slept in alone for 3 years now, and let the grief wash over me in waves. Not just grief for the daughter who had turned so cold, but grief for the illusion I'd been clinging to that we were still a family. The house was quiet around me. Sarah and David had gone to bed without another word, and the children had long since fallen asleep. I could hear the familiar sounds of the old place settling, the creak of floorboards, the whisper of wind through the eaves, the gentle tick of the heating system cycling on. This house had always been a comfort to me, even during the darkest days after Frank's passing. But tonight it felt different. Tonight, it felt like a place I was no longer welcome. I must have sat there for hours, just listening and remembering. Remembering Sarah as a little girl, curled up beside me on rainy afternoons while I read her stories. Remembering how proud she'd been when she graduated nursing school, how she'd hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. I couldn't have done it without you, Mom, she'd whispered in my ear. Thank you for believing in me. When had that gratitude turned to resentment? When had love become such a burden? But as the clock on my nightstand crept past midnight, something inside me began to shift. Maybe it was exhaustion, or maybe it was just the stubborn streak I'd inherited from my own mother. But I felt my spine straightening and my chin lifting the way it used to when I was younger and the world tried to knock me down. I remembered who I was before I became just grandma, or the burden upstairs. I remembered Rose Patterson, not Rose the widow, not Rose the unwanted guest, but Rose the woman who had built a life alongside the love of her life. Walking to my small dresser, I pulled out the bottom drawer and felt around behind my winter sweaters until my fingers found what I was looking for, a manila folder, worn soft at the edges from handling. I hadn't looked at these papers in months, maybe longer. Grief has a way of making you avoid the practical things, the business of living that continues even when your heart feels like it stopped beating. I sat back down on the bed and opened the folder under the soft glow of my bedside lamp. Property deeds, bank statements, investment records, insurance policies, the accumulated paperwork of a life well lived and carefully planned. You see, dear, what none of them knew was that Frank and I had been quite successful in our younger years. Not wealthy by some standards, but comfortable. Secure. We'd worked hard and saved harder, and Frank had always had an eye for real estate. Land is the one thing they're not making any more of, Rosie, he used to say, signing another mortgage document with that careful signature of his. Buy it when you can, hold on to it, and it'll take care of you later. And he'd been right. The first property we'd bought was a small duplex on Maple Street, back when Sarah was in high school and we could barely afford the down payment. Frank had worked overtime at the plant for 6 months straight to make it happen, coming home every night with grease under his fingernails and exhaustion in his shoulders. But he'd been so proud the day we signed those papers, so sure he was building something lasting for our family. The second property came 5 years later, a little ranch house on Elm Avenue that we'd fixed up ourselves, spending weekends painting walls and refinishing hardwood floors. Frank had taught me how to tile a bathroom in that house, both of us laughing as we tried to get the lines straight, getting more adhesive on ourselves than on the walls. The third property was our dream, a beautiful colonial on Riverside Drive with mature oak trees and a view of the river. We'd planned to retire there, to spend our golden years watching the seasons change from the front porch swing Frank had promised to build. But life, as it has a way of doing, had other plans. After Frank's funeral, I couldn't bear the thought of moving into that dream house alone. Every room would echo with his absence, every corner would remind me of plans we'd made, but would never fulfill. So I'd done what I thought was best for everyone. I'd let my grieving daughter and her family move into it while I found comfort in their everyday chaos, in being needed again. What I hadn't told them, what I'd never found the right way to explain, was that the house they were living in, the house where my daughter was now demanding I pay more rent or leave, was actually my house. I owned it outright, mortgage-free, and they had been living there as my guests for the past 2 years, not the other way around. I'd told them it belonged to Frank's cousin Harold, a man who died 15 years ago and couldn't contradict the story. Harold's traveling abroad, I'd said when they'd asked about lease agreements and rental contracts. He's happy to have the place occupied by family. Just take care of it, and we'll worry about the paperwork later. Later had become 2 years, and the paperwork had never materialized because there was no paperwork. There was just a lonely old woman who wanted to live with her family and was willing to pretend to be a paying tenant rather than admit she was the one doing them the favor. I pulled out the deed now, studying the familiar legal language that designated me as the sole owner of 847 Riverside Drive. All those months of Sarah complaining about the mortgage payments, about how tight money was, about how they could barely afford the upkeep on Harold's place. All those times I'd slipped extra money into their budget, disguising it as gifts or loans that I never expected to be repaid. They had no mortgage, no rent, no housing costs at all except utilities and basic maintenance. I had been covering their biggest expense for 2 years, and they had no idea. The bank statements told an even more complete story. Beyond the properties, Frank and I had been careful savers. His life insurance policy had been substantial, and my Social Security combined with the rental income from the other 2 properties provided me with a comfortable living. I wasn't rich, but I wasn't the struggling widow my daughter believed me to be. I could afford my own apartment. I could afford a nice little place with a garden where I could grow tomatoes and maybe get a cat for company. I could afford to travel, to visit old friends, to do all the things Frank and I had talked about doing when we had more time. What I couldn't afford, apparently, was my daughter's love. The realization should have made me angry, and part of me was. But mostly, I felt a deep, aching sadness for the woman Sarah had become. She was so focused on getting ahead, on climbing some imaginary ladder of success, that she couldn't see what she already had. She couldn't see that her mother's love had been holding her up all along. I thought about the promotion that had changed everything, how it had filled Sarah with ambitions that required shedding anything she saw as dead weight, including me. Tomorrow, I would start making phone calls. Not to find myself a desperate refuge, but to reclaim my independence and my dignity. I would find a place of my own, somewhere I could be Rose Patterson again instead of just the unwanted grandmother upstairs. But first, there was something else I needed to do. I walked quietly downstairs to the kitchen, my bare feet silent on the hardwood floors Frank had refinished with his own hands. The house felt different in the darkness, more like the home it had been meant to be, and less like the battleground it had become. In the junk drawer beside the sink, I found what I was looking for. the spare key to my safe deposit box at First National Bank. Tomorrow, I would visit Mr. Henderson, the bank manager who'd known Frank and me for 20 years. I would update my will, make some changes to my estate planning, and put certain legal matters in order. Because if Sarah wanted to treat me like a tenant, if she wanted to demand rent and threaten eviction, then maybe it was time she learned what it really meant to be a landlord. Maybe it was time she discovered that actions have consequences, even when you're someone's daughter. Standing in my kitchen, and it was my kitchen, every cabinet and appliance chosen by Frank and me, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Not anger exactly, but a quiet, steady resolve. I had spent 3 years trying to be small, trying to fit into the spaces my family carved out for me. I had bent myself into shapes that didn't suit me, all in the name of being wanted. But maybe being wanted wasn't the same thing as being loved. And maybe it was time to stop trying so hard to be both. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 2 o'clock, and I realized I was no longer tired. My mind was clear for the first time in months, sharp with purpose and possibility. I had work to do, plans to make, a life to reclaim. Sarah had given me 30 days to figure out my living situation. That was more than enough time to figure out a great deal more than that. I climbed the stairs one more time, but my steps felt different now. Not the shuffling gait of a defeated old woman, but the firm stride of someone who remembered she had choices. Someone who remembered she had worth beyond what she could provide for others. In my room, I tucked the manila folder back into its hiding place and pulled out a small notebook and pen. At the top of the first page, I wrote things to do in my careful handwriting. The list was going to be longer than my daughter imagined. If you're still listening to this story up to this point, why don't you subscribe to this channel to continue getting impactful daily stories like this? We would be most grateful if you can do that to help boost this video to reach everyone. Thank you. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, the kind of February day that promises spring isn't as far away as it seems. I woke before my alarm, feeling more rested than I had in months despite having slept only a few hours. There's something to be said for the clarity that comes with making a decision, even when that decision breaks your heart. I dressed carefully in my navy blue suit, the one I'd worn to Frank's funeral and hadn't touched since. It still fit perfectly, and wearing it made me feel like the competent woman I'd been before grief had softened all my edges. I styled my silver hair the way I used to for church committee meetings, applied a touch of lipstick, and looked at myself in the mirror with something approaching approval. Rose Patterson was back. Downstairs, the house was still quiet. Sarah wouldn't be up for another hour, and David never stirred before his alarm went off at 7. I made coffee in my old percolator. Frank had bought it for me 30 years ago, saying instant coffee was no way for a lady to start her day, and sat at the kitchen table with my notebook, finalizing my plans. At exactly 9 o'clock, I dialed the number I'd memorized decades ago. Henderson, Mitchell and Associates, came the familiar voice of Patricia, the receptionist who'd been answering their phones since I was Sarah's age. Good morning, Patricia. This is Rose Patterson. I need to speak with Mr. Henderson, please. Mrs. Patterson, how lovely to hear from you. I'll put you right through. Within moments, I heard the warm, gravelly voice of James Henderson, the lawyer who'd handled all of Frank's and my business affairs for the past 25 years. He'd been a young man when we'd first met him, ambitious and eager to prove himself. Now his hair was as silver as mine, and his practice had grown to include both his sons. Rose, my dear, what can I do for you? I want to sell the house on Riverside Drive. I told him calmly, my voice steady as steel. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Mrs. Patterson, are you sure? That's where your daughter's family lives. Oh, I'm very sure, James. I took a sip of my coffee, tasting the rich boldness that instant coffee could never match. I want it listed today if possible. Another pause, longer this time. James Henderson hadn't built his reputation by asking unnecessary questions, but I could hear the concern in his voice when he spoke again. Rose, is everything all right? You've seemed happy with the arrangement. Happy. Such a simple word for such a complicated situation. Let's just say circumstances have changed, and I find I need to make some adjustments to my living situation. I see. And knowing James as I did, I suspected he saw more than I was saying. What about your current tenants? Do they have a lease agreement? There is no lease agreement, James. There never was. They'll have 60 days to find other accommodations, which is more generous than the law requires. I kept my voice businesslike, professional. This was a transaction now, nothing more. All right then. I'll call Margaret Thornfield at Riverside Realty this morning. She's the best in the business and with the current market. He trailed off, and I could almost hear him calculating figures in his head. Rose, that area has appreciated significantly in the past few years. You could be looking at quite a substantial profit. How substantial? Well, conservatively speaking, I'd say you're looking at somewhere between $450,000 and $500,000. Maybe more if we get into a bidding war. The number took my breath away. Frank and I had bought that house for $87,000 12 years ago, thinking we were splurging beyond our means. Now it was worth more than 5 times that amount. List it for $475,000, I said. I want it to move quickly. Consider it done. Margaret will probably want to do a walkthrough today, if that's convenient. And Rose, you might want to think about how you want to handle this with your family. These things can get complicated. Complicated. That was one word for it. After I hung up, I sat in the quiet kitchen for a long time, listening to the house wake up around me. Sarah's alarm went off upstairs, followed by the sound of her feet hitting the floor. David's shower started running. Soon, Tommy would be stumbling downstairs looking for cereal, and Emma would appear with her hair sticking up in all directions, needing help with the braids she insisted on wearing to school. Normal morning sounds. Family sounds. The sounds of a life I was about to dismantle. Margaret Thornfield called back within 2 hours, her voice bright with the kind of enthusiasm that comes from a potentially lucrative listing. Mrs. Patterson, James filled me in on the basics. I have to tell you, this is perfect timing. I've got 3 families looking in that exact area, and inventory is practically non-existent. Would this afternoon work for a showing? I know it's quick, but... This afternoon is fine, I said. But I should mention that the house is currently occupied. Family members who aren't aware yet that it's going on the market. A delicate pause. I see. Well, we can work around that. I'll schedule the showing for 1 o'clock if that suits you. Most people are at work then. Most people. But not retired grandmothers who suddenly found themselves planning the upheaval of their entire family's life. At exactly 1 o'clock, Margaret arrived with the first family, a young couple with a toddler who cooed over the hardwood floors Frank had refinished and exclaimed over the updated kitchen I'd insisted on 3 years ago. They walked through every room, the wife taking notes in a small leather journal, the husband measuring windows with a small tape measure. The backyard is perfect for children, the woman said, standing at the kitchen window and looking out at the swing set David had built for Tommy and Emma. And the schools in this district are supposed to be excellent. They made an offer that afternoon. Full asking price, cash deal, 60-day closing. Margaret was practically vibrating with excitement when she called. Rose, I've never seen anything like it. They don't even want an inspection contingency. Said the house showed so well they're comfortable with it as is. Accept it, I said without hesitation. Don't you want to think about it? Or maybe discuss it with your family. The house is mine to sell, Margaret. Accept the offer. The second family came the next morning, bringing their elderly parents to see the charming colonial with character. They offered $10,000 over asking price and promised a 30-day closing. The third family, a professional couple relocating from Chicago, offered $25,000 over asking price and threw in a clause to cover all closing costs. Within a week, I had 3 offers above asking price, each one more generous than the last. The housing market was hot, and my beautiful 4-bedroom home with the big backyard, where my grandchildren played, was worth far more than I had imagined. I accepted the Chicago couple's offer. They were serious buyers with proven finances, and they wanted to close in 3 weeks. Margaret warned me it was aggressive, but I told her aggressive was exactly what I needed. What I hadn't expected was how fascinating it would be to watch Sarah navigate what she thought was a housing crisis beyond her control. It started on Thursday morning when she came downstairs already dressed for work, her face creased with worry lines that hadn't been there the week before. "David," she said, not bothering with good morning pleasantries, "did you call that rental agency yesterday?" David looked up from his coffee, his expression carefully neutral. "Which rental agency?" "The one I gave you the number for. The one that supposedly has listings in decent neighborhoods that we can actually afford." Her voice was sharp with stress, the kind of edge that comes from too many sleepless nights spent running numbers that don't add up. "I called them. They said everything in our price range is either too small or in areas where we don't want the kids going to school." Sarah sank into her chair like the weight of the world was pressing down on her shoulders. "This is impossible. Do you know what rent costs now?" For a 3-bedroom house in a decent neighborhood? We're talking $1,500 minimum, and that's not even counting utilities or security deposits. I sipped my coffee and said nothing, though I could have told her that $1,500 was exactly what she'd been saving by living in my house rent-free for 2 years. Instead, I watched her flip through a stack of rental listings, her pen making sharp, frustrated marks as she crossed out option after option. "Mom," she said suddenly, looking at me with the kind of expression people wear when they're about to ask for something they know they shouldn't. "You don't suppose Harold would consider letting us stay another year or two? I know he was planning to sell eventually, but maybe if we offered to sign a longer lease." The irony was so perfect it took my breath away. Sarah was asking me to negotiate with myself for the privilege of continuing to live in my own house. The same house she'd told me I couldn't afford to stay in. "Harold's pretty set on his timeline," I said mildly. "You know how he is about his travel plans." Sarah's face fell. "Right. Of course." She went back to her listings with renewed desperation, muttering under her breath about selfish landlords and impossible rent prices. Over the next few days, I watched my daughter scramble in ways I'd never seen before. She called in favors with friends, begging them to keep an eye out for rental opportunities. She spent her lunch breaks driving around neighborhoods, looking for rent signs that might not have made it into the newspaper listings yet. She even swallowed her pride enough to ask David's mother, a woman she'd never particularly liked, if she knew of any available properties. The stress was taking its toll. Sarah snapped at the children over small things, forgot to pick up Emma from her piano lesson, and started having whispered, tense conversations with David after they thought everyone was asleep. The timing couldn't be worse. I heard her tell her friend Caroline during a phone conversation I wasn't supposed to overhear. Just when we were finally getting ahead financially, Harold decides to sell. It's like he planned it to screw us over. She had no idea how carefully the timing had actually been planned. "And the worst part," Sarah continued, her voice rising with frustration, "is that we've put so much work into this place. David built that deck himself, and I spent last summer painting the entire upstairs. Now some stranger is going to benefit from all our improvements. All their improvements to my house. Improvements I'd been quietly financing through the grocery money and utility, help and car insurance payments they didn't know I was making." The real entertainment came when Sarah started venting to her friends about the situation, not knowing that the selfish landlord she was complaining about was sitting right there in the kitchen, quietly knitting while she paced the living room with her phone pressed to her ear. "I just don't understand people like that," she said to someone, probably her friend Janet from work. "How can you just throw a family out with no warning? We've been perfect tenants. Never late with rent, took care of the place like it was our own. And he can't even give us the courtesy of a longer notice period. Perfect tenants who had never paid a dime of rent." I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing. But the most delicious irony came on Tuesday afternoon when Sarah brought home a stack of rental applications, spreading them across the kitchen table like battle plans. "Look at this," she said to David, tapping one form with her pen. "They want 3 references, first and last month's rent, plus a security deposit equal to 1 month's rent. We're talking about $4,500 just to move into a place that's smaller than what we have now." "We'll figure it out," David said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Figure it out how? With what money?" Sarah's voice was climbing toward hysteria. "After we pay all the moving costs and deposits, we'll be broke for months. And that's assuming we can even find a place that will take us with our credit score." Their credit score. Another little detail I'd been helping with by quietly paying off their credit card balances, keeping their debt-to-income ratio manageable. Without my invisible support, their financial picture was apparently much more precarious than they'd realized. I folded my knitting and placed it carefully in my basket. "I think I'll take a walk before dinner," I announced to no one in particular. Outside, the February air was crisp and clean, and I felt lighter than I had in years. Each step took me further from the chaos I'd created and closer to the new life I was building. By the time I returned, I had made several more decisions about my future. Decisions that would surprise everyone who thought they knew quiet, accommodating Rose Patterson. The truth, I was learning, really did have perfect timing. And mine was just getting started. The day of the closing arrived faster than anyone expected. Everyone except me, that is. I'd been counting down the days like a woman preparing for the most important performance of her life, which in many ways I was. I woke that morning in my little upstairs room for what I knew would be the last time. Through my window, I could see the moving truck that had arrived at dawn, its hulking presence in the driveway like a period at the end of a very long sentence. Sarah and David had been up since 5 o'clock, their voices carrying through the walls as they directed the movers with the frantic energy of people who still couldn't quite believe their world was changing so quickly. By 10 o'clock, most of their belongings were loaded into the truck, and the house that had been filled with the chaos of family life for 2 years echoed with emptiness. I found Sarah in the kitchen, sitting alone at the table we'd shared for countless meals, staring at the bare walls with the hollow expression of someone who'd lost something precious without quite understanding how. "Mom," she said when she saw me, her voice small and tired in a way that reminded me of the little girl who used to crawl into my bed after nightmares. "I can't believe this is really happening." I sat down across from her, my hands folded carefully in my lap. "Sarah, honey, I need to talk to you about something important." She looked up at me with eyes that were red-rimmed from lack of sleep and stress. "If this is about where you're going to live, I've been thinking. Maybe we could work something out with the new place. It's smaller, but there might be room for." "No, sweetheart." I reached into my purse and pulled out a manila envelope, the same one I'd been carrying with me for 3 days, waiting for exactly this moment. "I have something for you." Sarah stared at the envelope like it might contain bad news, which I supposed, in a way, it did. "What's this, Mom?" "Open it." With trembling fingers, she lifted the flap and peered inside. I watched her face change as she processed what she was seeing, first confusion, then shock, then something that looked almost like fear. "Mom, I don't understand." She pulled out the cashier's check with hands that shook so badly the paper rustled. $200,000? Where did this come from? And what's this letter? "Read the letter, Sarah. Read it all the way through." I had written that letter a dozen times, crumpling up draft after draft until I found the words that said exactly what needed to be said. No more, no less. The truth, plain and simple, in my own handwriting on the good stationery Frank had bought me for our anniversary years ago. I watched Sarah's eyes move across the page, her face growing paler with each paragraph. When she finished, she set the letter down carefully, as if it were made of glass that might shatter if handled roughly. "You own this house." Her voice was barely a whisper. "All this time you own this house?" "Yes." "We've been living here rent-free for 2 years." "Yes." "And I told you to pay $1,200 rent or get out." The words seemed to stick in her throat. "I told you to get out of your own house." I reached across the table and took her hand, the same hand I'd held when she took her first steps, when she scraped her knee learning to ride a bicycle, when she cried over her first broken heart. "Sarah, I need you to understand something. I didn't tell you about the house because I wanted you to have a home where you felt secure, where you didn't feel beholden to anyone. I thought if you knew it was mine, you'd feel like you owed me something, and I never wanted that. But we do owe you something," she said, and now the tears were coming in earnest. "We owe you everything. The house, the financial help you've been giving us without us knowing, the childcare, the cooking, the cleaning." She pressed her free hand to her mouth, trying to hold back sobs. "Oh God, Mom, what have I done?" "You've been trying to build a life for your family," I said gently. "There's no shame in that. But somewhere along the way, you forgot that I was family too." Sarah broke down completely then, her shoulders shaking with the kind of grief that comes from realizing you've hurt someone you love in ways that can't be easily fixed. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened to me. I got so caught up in trying to get ahead, trying to prove I could provide for my family, that I turned into someone I don't even recognize." I moved around the table and pulled her into my arms the way I had when she was small, and the world seemed too big and scary to handle alone. She clung to me like she was drowning, and maybe she was drowning in the realization of what she'd almost lost. "I treated you like a burden," she whispered against my shoulder. "My own mother, and I treated you like you were some inconvenience I had to manage. How can you ever forgive me?" "Oh, sweetheart," I said, stroking her hair the way I had when she was little. "I forgave you before you even asked. That's what mothers do. But forgiveness doesn't mean pretending this didn't happen, and it doesn't mean going back to the way things were." Sarah pulled back to look at me, her face streaked with tears. "What do you mean?" "I mean I've made some decisions about my life, and they're not going to change just because we're talking now." I handed her a tissue from my purse. "The house sale is final. I'm moving into Sunset Manor next week. It's a beautiful senior community where I'll have my own apartment and my independence. But you don't have to do that anymore. Now that I know the truth, we can work something out. We can. No, Sarah. My voice was firm but not unkind. We can't. Because what you said to me that night, the way you made me feel like I was nothing more than a financial burden, that broke something in me that can't be unbroken. I need to rebuild my sense of self-worth, and I can't do that living in your shadow, wondering if you really want me there, or if you're just tolerating me out of guilt. Sarah's face crumpled again. So that's it? You're just going to cut us out of your life? Of course not. You're my daughter, and Tommy and Emma are my grandchildren. I will always love you all. But our relationship is going to be different now. It's going to be built on mutual respect instead of obligation. I stood up and walked to the kitchen window, looking out at the backyard where the children's swing set still stood, though they'd outgrown it years ago. I'll see the children whenever you'd like to bring them to visit me. We can have dinner together, go to their school plays, celebrate birthdays and holidays. But you'll call first. You'll ask if it's convenient. You'll treat me like the independent woman I am, not a burden to be managed or a resource to be used. Mom! Sarah's voice was small and broken. The money from the house sale, your portion is in that check. Consider it your inheritance given early. Use it wisely. Buy a house, invest it, secure your children's future. But don't use it to try to buy back what we had, because what we had wasn't healthy for either of us. I turned back to face her, and I could see she was struggling to understand this new version of her mother. Not the accommodating, eager-to-please woman who'd lived upstairs for 3 years, but the Rose Patterson who'd built a successful life with Frank, who'd raised a daughter on her own strength, who'd survived grief and loneliness and come out stronger on the other side. I don't understand, Sarah said. If you can forgive me, why can't we just go back to the way things were before? Because before was killing me slowly, I said, and the honesty of it rang in the empty kitchen. I lost myself trying to be what you needed me to be. I made myself smaller and smaller until I almost disappeared completely. I won't do that again, not for anyone. But what about the children? They love having you around. They're going to be devastated. The children will adjust. And they'll learn something important from watching how we handle this. They'll learn that people should treat each other with respect, even family members. Especially family members. Sarah was quiet for a long time, turning the check over in her hands like she was trying to make sense of its weight. Finally, she looked up at me with something that might have been the beginning of understanding. You're not just my mother anymore, are you? You're Rose Patterson. You're your own person. I always was, sweetheart. I just forgot for a while. She nodded slowly, and I could see her trying to wrap her mind around this new reality. The senior community you're moving to, is it nice? It's beautiful. I have a 1-bedroom apartment with a little balcony where I can grow herbs. There's a library, a fitness center, and a community garden. They organize trips to museums and theaters. There's even a book club. It sounds perfect for you. It is. And Sarah? The remaining money from the house sale, I'm using it to travel. Frank and I always planned to see the world together, but we kept putting it off, waiting for the right time. Well, the right time is now. Sarah's eyes widened. You're going to travel? By yourself. I'm going to start with a river cruise through Europe. Then maybe Australia, or Japan, or anywhere else that catches my fancy. I'm 72 years old, and I've spent the last 3 years thinking my life was winding down. But it's not winding down, it's just changing direction. I can't believe this, Sarah said, shaking her head. Yesterday, I thought you were this fragile old woman who needed taking care of. Today, I find out you're like some kind of secret millionaire who's planning world travel. I laughed, and it felt good to laugh again. Not a millionaire, but comfortable enough. Your father and I were careful with money, and careful planning pays off in the end. All those times I worried about you financially, all those times I felt guilty about you paying rent. You never needed to worry about me financially, Sarah. You needed to worry about me emotionally. You needed to see that I was dying a little bit every day from feeling unwanted and unvalued. Money can't fix that kind of poverty. Sarah was quiet again, processing everything I'd told her. Finally, she asked, "Can I call you? When you're settled in your new place. Can I bring the kids to visit?" "Of course you can. But you'll call first, and you'll ask if it's convenient. You'll treat me like a person whose time and space matter, not like someone who exists solely for your convenience." "I will, I promise. And Mom, I'm going to spend the rest of my life making this up to you." "No, Sarah. You're going to spend the rest of your life being the daughter I raised you to be. Kind, thoughtful, and respectful. Not because you owe me something, but because that's who you are when you remember who you are." An hour later, I watched from my bedroom window as Sarah and David loaded the last of their belongings into their car. The children had been staying with David's parents during the move, sparing them the chaos and the difficult conversations. I would see them soon, but in my new home, on my own terms. Sarah looked up at my window before she got in the car, and I raised my hand in a small wave. She waved back, and for the first time in months, her smile looked genuine instead of strained. After they drove away, I walked through the empty house one more time, saying goodbye to the memories held in each room. But I wasn't sad. I was ready for whatever came next. 6 months later, I'm writing this from the deck of a river cruise ship as we glide through the Rhine Valley, the German countryside rolling past like something from a fairy tale. My cabin is small but comfortable, and I've made friends with 3 other solo travelers who share my love of adventure and good conversation. Sarah calls every Sunday now, and we talk for exactly as long as I want to talk, no more, no less. She brings the children to visit twice a month, and they're always excited to hear about my travels and see the postcards I collect from each new place. The respect I demanded isn't grudging or guilt-driven anymore. Sarah genuinely seems to enjoy our new relationship, and I think she's proud of the mother she rediscovered. The one who refused to disappear quietly, who demanded to be seen and valued for who she was. Sometimes the best gift you can give someone is letting them face the consequences of their actions. My daughter needed to learn that a mother's love has limits, and respect isn't optional, it's earned. I needed to remember that being a mother doesn't mean being a doormat. We're rebuilding our relationship now, but on my terms, with clear boundaries and mutual respect. And you know what? It's better this way. Love without respect is just manipulation dressed up in pretty words. Real love requires seeing each other clearly, accepting each other fully, and choosing to cherish what you have. Tomorrow we dock in Amsterdam, and I'm planning to visit the Van Gogh Museum. Frank would have loved it. He always appreciated art, though we never had the time or money to indulge that interest when we were younger. But I have time now. I have money now. And most importantly, I have myself back. Sometimes, honey, you have to lose everything to remember who you really are. And sometimes, the person you rediscover is stronger and more wonderful than you ever imagined. Thank you for watching this video. Subscribe, like and share this video to continue listening to this type of story daily, and also, to appreciate this community too. I would like to hear your wonderful opinion about this story. Please comment below.